Have you ever wondered why we have never seen an animal like a peacat or a turtle ruff or even a panda monkey? Well, you're in for a real ride today because we are going to talk about why animals from different species don't intermingle together and have offspring with each other. If we have never met before, my name is Nigel and I graduated with a 99.05 ATAR in 2023 and received an average of 19.5 in all my science subjects last year, and it is my pleasure to bring you this video on reproductive isolation. So why don't we have all these weird hybrid animals wandering around? Like, surely you've had these different species intermingle with each other and make all these crazy creatures. Well, it's because of this idea called reproductive isolation. So now let's imagine that you are trapped inside of a cage, and on the other side of the cage are all of your crushes, and as much as you want to go be with them, that cage is stopping you from doing that. And you could describe this cage as reproductive isolation. Reproductive isolation means that when it comes to mating season, animals from different species cannot intermingle with each other due to different factors. The reason it is called reproductive isolation is that the DNA of each species becomes isolated from each other and it prevents those genes from being shared around all those different organisms. It maintains the integrity of all the species. The reason that we can tell that frogs are frogs and birds are birds is because the DNA has not been intermingled. It's very distinct between each species. So one of the methods which is involved in maintaining reproductive isolation is called Pre-Zygotic Mechanisms. This means that when it comes for the time for animals to mate, a zygote cannot be formed if they do intermingle between species, and this prevents a baby from being born and then the hybrid reproducing. So this can occur in 4 different ways: temporal isolation, behavioural isolation, mechanical isolation, and gamete isolation. So let's start with temporal isolation. Temporal isolation means that different species have different mating times throughout the year when they are most fertile. So maybe in a season early on in the year, you have one species of animals going into their mating season, and then later down the track in a different season, you have a completely different species going into their mating season. A classic example of this is with nocturnal animals. Because they are asleep all day, they're not going to have the chance to intermingle with the animals who are active during the day. This is going to stop them from mating and eventually producing a hybrid. And because they aren't going to have the opportunity to mate with each other, the gene pools are going to be kept separate. Next, we have a mechanism called behavioural isolation. This means that mating behaviours such as calls, dances, and other rituals don't really carry over when animals from one species try to use them on animals of a different species. In Gen Z slang, this means that what one species considers as Riz, another species might not consider it Riz. For example, you've never seen a frog riz up a fish. Only fish can riz up fish. So for all the disappointed single guys out there, do not worry, it's not rejection, it's behavioural isolation. Now let's move on to mechanical isolation. Mechanical isolation is probably the most awkward one to talk about because it has to do with the shape of the animal's sexual organs. Believe it or not, the shape varies differently between different species, making them incompatible with each other and preventing them from mating and producing offspring. I don't want to get into too many details of how it works, but all I gotta say is if the shoe doesn't fit, don't wear it. And now finally we have gamete isolation. This one is extremely straightforward. It just means that if any mating or interbreeding does happen between different species, the sperm and egg are not going to be compatible with each other. There's not going to be any fertilization and the zygote will not be produced. And because the zygote cannot be produced, there's not going to be any hybrid offspring produced. So now we have covered all the pre-zygotic mechanisms. But what about the post-zygotic mechanisms? Post-zygotic mechanisms means that even if 2 animals from different species interbreed with each other, the resulting hybrid offspring will not be able to have any more offspring, preventing that population from growing. There are 2 mechanisms which we can consider as post-zygotic mechanisms, and the first one we are going to talk about is hybrid inviability. Hybrid inviability means that when the offspring is born, it's going to be too weak and dysfunctional, and it's not going to be able to compete with other organisms in the environment for food and other resources. This means that the hybrid will eventually die before mating age, which prevents them from having any children. The second mechanism is hybrid sterility. Unlike in hybrid inviability, hybrid sterility means that the resulting animal can still grow up into adulthood, except it still cannot have children. This is because it will have an odd number of chromosomes, unlike a normal functioning organism which will have an even number. This is a problem because if the hybrid does want to reproduce, having an odd number of chromosomes will really stuff up the cell division process of meiosis. I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty details of cell division and meiosis in this video, but why don't you comment down below if you really want that video, maybe I might make it for you. So a classic example of hybrid sterility is the mule. Mules are formed by a horse which has 64 chromosomes and a donkey which has 62 chromosomes. This means that after they mate and they form a zygote which will then begin growing through meiosis, the mule is only going to have 63 chromosomes, and again, because it's an odd number, they will not be able to produce any offspring and grow the population. And there you have it. Now you know a little bit more about reproductive isolation and the different mechanisms in which this can occur through. To stay updated, why don't you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another video again. Also, why don't you leave a like and comment below on what lesson you think I should do next. Also, why don't you head over to our Instagram page where we post study tips for students to enjoy. Thank you so much for watching this video, and this is Nigel signing out.